Elena Vasquez was 19 years old the first time she ever touched a real piano. Not a keyboard, not a digital instrument with plastic keys. A real, wooden, beautiful piano with strings inside that vibrated when you pressed down and made sounds that filled up a whole room. She stood in the corner of a church basement in Memphis, Tennessee, staring at the old, upright piano like it was something from another world. The pastor had told her she could practice there whenever she wanted. He had heard her playing her little keyboard through the thin walls of her trailer and thought she had something special. But standing there in that cold basement, Elena felt like a fraud. Because the truth was, she had no idea what she was doing. Growing up, Elena never had lessons. She never had a teacher. She never had anyone sit beside her and show her where to put her fingers or how to read the notes on a page. Everything she knew about music, she had taught herself. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. She left before sunrise and came home after midnight smelling like grease from the diner and exhaustion from life. There was no money for piano lessons. There was barely money for food some weeks. So when Elena was 11 years old and found a broken keyboard at a yard sale for $40, she used every penny she had saved from collecting cans and bottles to buy it. That keyboard became her entire world. It was missing 3 keys. The sustain pedal did not work. Some of the notes sounded wrong no matter how many times she pressed them. But to Elena, it was perfect. She would sit on the floor of her tiny bedroom, plug in her headphones so she would not wake her mother, and play for hours. She learned by watching videos online. She would pause, rewind, and replay the same tutorial 50 times until her fingers remembered where to go. She did not understand music theory. She could not read sheet music, but she could listen to a song and figure out how to play it by ear. That was her gift. By the time she was 16, Elena could play pieces that most trained pianists struggled with. She played Beethoven. She played Chopin. She played songs that were written by people who had lived and died hundreds of years ago, and she played them in a trailer park in the middle of nowhere, on a $40 keyboard with broken keys. Nobody knew about her talent. She never told anyone. Music was her secret, her escape, her way of pretending that her life was something more than what it was. When she played, she forgot about the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. She forgot about the kids at school who made fun of her old clothes. She forgot about her father, whoever he was, wherever he had gone. When she played, she was free. The day everything changed started like any other day. Elena was working at a convenience store after school, stacking shelves and trying to ignore the ache in her feet. A customer left behind a flyer on the counter. It was an advertisement for a regional talent competition with a grand prize that made Elena's heart stop. A full scholarship to the Whitmore Conservatory in New York City. Whitmore was one of the most famous music schools in the entire country. Students came from all over the world to study there. The best pianists, the best violinists, the best musicians of their generation walked through those doors. And here was a chance, a real chance, for someone like Elena to join them. She almost threw the flyer away. What was the point? She had no training, no credentials, no fancy recordings or letters of recommendation. She was just a girl from a trailer park who played a broken keyboard in her bedroom. The judges would laugh at her. But something inside her would not let go of that flyer. She folded it up and put it in her pocket. That night, she looked up the competition online and watched videos of past winners. They were incredible, polished, professional. Everything Elena was not. She entered anyway. The audition was held in a community center 2 hours away. Elena borrowed her neighbor's car and drove there with her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. When she walked into the room, she saw a grand piano sitting in the center of the stage. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The judges sat behind a long table with serious expressions on their faces. There were other contestants waiting in the hallway, all of them looking confident and well-dressed. Elena looked down at her second-hand blouse and felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. When they called her name, she walked to the piano on shaky legs. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. They felt different from her keyboard. Smoother, heavier, real. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. She chose a piece by Chopin. It was complicated and emotional, and probably too ambitious for someone with no formal training. But Elena did not care about what was safe. She cared about what she felt. And when she played that piece, she felt everything. She felt the loneliness of growing up without a father. She felt the love for her mother who sacrificed everything. She felt the hunger, the wanting, the desperate hope that life could be more than just survival. She poured all of it into the music, every single drop of pain and joy and longing that had been building up inside her for 19 years. When she finished, her hands were trembling. She opened her eyes and looked at the judges. One of them was wiping her eyes. Another was leaning forward in his chair with his mouth slightly open. The third was writing something down very quickly. 2 weeks later, Elena received a letter in the mail. Her mother was at work, so she opened it alone, standing in the kitchen with the afternoon sun coming through the dirty window. She had won, not just the competition, the scholarship, a full ride to Whitmore Conservatory, covering tuition, room and board, and even a small allowance for living expenses. Someone had seen her. Someone had believed she was worth taking a chance on. Elena read the letter 3 times before she believed it was real. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and cried until she could not breathe. When her mother came home that night, exhausted and sore like always, Elena showed her the letter. Her mother stared at it for a long time without saying anything. Then she looked at her daughter with tears streaming down her face and said, "I always knew you were meant for something bigger than this place." 3 weeks later, Elena packed everything she owned into 2 old suitcases. It was not much. Some clothes, some books, a photo of her mother, and the old keyboard that had started it all. She thought about leaving the keyboard behind, but she could not do it. It was part of her story. She hugged her mother goodbye at the bus station. Neither of them could find the right words, so they just held each other for a long time. Then Elena climbed onto the Greyhound bus heading north and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, she watched her hometown disappear behind her. The trailer park, the convenience store, the church with the piano in the basement. Everything she had ever known grew smaller and smaller until it was gone. Elena leaned her head against the glass and closed her eyes. She was scared. She was excited. She was completely alone for the first time in her life. She had no idea that the hardest part of her journey was still waiting for her in New York. She did not know about the cruel words that would break her down, the loneliness that would nearly destroy her, or the unexpected friendship that would save her life. All she knew in that moment was that she was finally on her way, and she was not going to let anything stop her. The bus ride to New York took almost 20 hours. Elena barely slept. She spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching the landscape change from flat southern fields to rolling hills to crowded cities she had only ever seen in movies. By the time the bus pulled into the station in Manhattan, her legs were stiff and her heart was racing. She had never seen so many people in one place. Everyone moved fast, like they had somewhere important to be. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody smiled. Elena stood on the sidewalk with her 2 suitcases, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. It took her an hour to figure out the subway. She got on the wrong train twice. A man yelled at her for blocking the doors. By the time she finally found the Whitmore Conservatory, she was exhausted, sweaty, and close to tears. But then she saw the building, and everything else faded away. Whitmore was beautiful. It looked like something out of a dream, with tall stone columns and huge windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Students walked up and down the front steps carrying instrument cases, laughing and talking like they belonged there, like they had always belonged there. Elena took a deep breath and walked through the front doors. The inside was even more impressive. The floors were polished marble. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Portraits of famous musicians lined the walls, their serious eyes seeming to follow her as she walked past. Everything about the place whispered the same message. This is where greatness lives. And Elena felt, deep in her bones, that she did not belong. She found her dormitory and unpacked her things in silence. Her roommate had not arrived yet, so she had the small room to herself. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked around at the bare walls, the empty desk, the window that looked out onto a courtyard filled with students practicing their instruments. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "These people have been training their whole lives. They have teachers and connections and expensive instruments. What do I have? A broken keyboard and a dream." But she had come too far to quit now. So she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and went to find her orientation packet. The first week at Whitmore was overwhelming. Elena quickly learned that she was surrounded by people who had been playing music since before they could walk. One girl in her theory class had performed at Carnegie Hall when she was 12. A boy in her ear training seminar had won national competitions in 3 different countries. Everyone seemed to know each other already, connected by years of summer programs and competitions and shared instructors. Elena knew nobody. She came from nowhere, and everyone could tell. The whispers started almost immediately. She heard them in the hallways, in the practice rooms, in the cafeteria where she ate alone at a corner table. "Did you hear? She taught herself on a keyboard? She has never had a real lesson in her life. How did she even get in here?" Elena tried to ignore it. She focused on her classes, on learning to read sheet music properly for the first time, on understanding the music theory that other students had mastered years ago. She practiced for hours every day, trying to catch up, trying to prove that she deserved to be there. But no matter how hard she worked, she could not shake the feeling that everyone was waiting for her to fail. Then came the welcome showcase. It was a tradition at Whitmore. Every new student was required to perform in front of the entire conservatory during the first month of classes. It was supposed to be an introduction, a chance to show what you could do, but Elena quickly realized it was also a test, a way for the faculty to separate the serious musicians from the ones who would wash out before the year was over. The night of the showcase, Elena stood backstage with shaking hands. She had chosen to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1, the same composer she had played at her audition. It was a risky choice. The piece was long and technically demanding, with passages that required years of training to execute properly. But Elena loved it. When she played it, she felt like the music was speaking directly through her. She peeked through the curtain at the auditorium. It was packed. Hundreds of students. Faculty members and staff filled the seats, and there, in the very front row, sat a man whose face Elena recognized from the portraits in the hallway. Maestro Theodore Harrington. Harrington was a legend. He had performed with every major orchestra in the world. He had won awards that most pianists could only dream of. And for the past 15 years, he had served as the faculty director of Whitmore Conservatory. His opinion could make or break a career. One word of praise from him could open doors that would otherwise stay closed forever. One word of criticism could destroy you. Elena watched him from behind the curtain. He sat with his arms crossed, his expression cold and unreadable. He looked like a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. When they called her name, Elena walked onto the stage with legs that felt like they might collapse beneath her. The lights were blinding. The audience was silent. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging her, waiting to see what the scholarship girl from Tennessee could do. She sat down at the grand piano and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, Her mind went completely blank. She could not remember the first note. She could not remember anything. Then she thought about her mother, working double shifts back home. She thought about the old keyboard with the broken keys. She thought about all the nights she had spent teaching herself, dreaming of this moment, and she began to play. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She played with everything she had, every emotion she had ever felt, every dream she had ever dared to dream. Her fingers moved across the keys with a passion that surprised even her. She forgot about the audience. She forgot about the judges. She forgot about everything except the music. When she played the final note, the sound hung in the air for a long moment. Then there was silence. Complete, total silence. Elena looked up, breathing hard, hoping to see some sign of approval, some small indication that she had done well. Instead, she saw Maestro Harrington rise from his seat. The entire auditorium held its breath. Harrington walked toward the stage with slow, deliberate steps. His face was impossible to read. When he reached the front, he stopped and looked at Elena like she was an insect he had found in his coffee. Then he spoke. His voice was calm and clear, designed to carry to every corner of the room. "That," he said, "was technically passable. Barely." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Elena felt her stomach drop. Harrington continued, "You play like someone who learned from a screen, not from the soul. There is no depth, no understanding of what the composer intended. You hit the notes, yes, but music is not about hitting notes. Music is about truth, and there was no truth in what I just heard." Elena's hands began to tremble. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but her voice would not come. Harrington looked out at the audience. "Whitmore Conservatory has a reputation to uphold. We are not a charity organization. We do not exist to give false hope to those who lack the foundation to ever truly excel." He turned back to Elena, and his eyes were like ice. "I suggest you consider whether this is really the place for you." Then he turned and walked back to his seat. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, someone laughed. A single, cruel laugh that broke the silence like a stone through glass. Other laughs followed. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Elena stood up from the piano bench. Her vision was blurry with tears she refused to let fall. She walked off stage with as much dignity as she could manage, which was not very much at all. When she reached the hallway, she ran. She ran until she found an empty bathroom, and then she locked herself in a stall and sobbed until her whole body ached. She had worked so hard. She had come so far. And in one moment, one man had torn it all down. That night, Elena sat in her dorm room and searched for bus tickets back to Memphis. She found one leaving the next morning. It would cost almost everything she had left, but she did not care. She could not stay here. She could not face those people again. She was not good enough, and everyone knew it. Her finger hovered over the purchase button. She thought about Harrington's words. "You play like someone who learned from a screen. No truth, no depth." Maybe he was right. Maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe some dreams were just too big for people like her. She was about to click the button when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Saw the live stream. You were beautiful. So proud of you. Keep going." Elena stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed the website without buying the ticket. She was not ready to give up. Not yet. But she had no idea how she was going to survive this place. The weeks after the showcase were the hardest of Elena's life. She became a ghost at Whitmore, moving through the hallways with her head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone she passed. The laughter had stopped, but somehow the silence was worse. People looked through her like she was not even there, like she had already failed and was just too stubborn to leave. She stopped eating in the cafeteria. The whispers and stares made her lose her appetite anyway. Instead, she grabbed food from the vending machines and ate alone in her room, staring at the wall and wondering why she was still here. Her roommate, a violinist from Connecticut, barely spoke to her. They existed in the same small space like strangers on a subway, polite but distant. Elena heard her talking on the phone one night, laughing about the girl who got destroyed by Harrington at the showcase. She pretended to be asleep, but she heard every word. Classes became a special kind of torture. Harrington taught the advanced piano seminar, and Elena was required to attend. He never called on her. He never looked at her. He acted like her chair was empty, like she had already disappeared. In some ways, that was worse than the public humiliation. At least when he had criticized her, he had acknowledged she existed. The other students followed his lead. Nobody wanted to be seen talking to the girl Harrington had dismissed. In a place like Whitmore, reputation was everything, and Elena's reputation was ruined before she even had a chance to build one. She thought about quitting every single day. Every morning, she woke up and asked herself the same question. Why am I still here? She did not have an answer. She just kept getting up, going to class, and practicing alone in the basement studios where nobody could hear her cry. The basement practice rooms were old and forgotten. Most students preferred the modern studios on the upper floors, with their perfect acoustics and beautiful instruments. But Elena liked the basement. It was quiet down there. Nobody bothered her. She could play for hours without worrying about who might be listening or judging. She started practicing at night, after everyone else had gone to sleep. She would sneak down to the basement around midnight and play until her fingers ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. It was the only time she felt like herself anymore. The only time the weight on her chest lifted enough for her to breathe. One night, about 2 months after the showcase, Elena was playing a piece by Debussy. It was soft and sad, full of longing and loss. She played it with her eyes closed, letting the music carry her somewhere far away from this place that had broken her heart. When she finished, she heard something that made her jump. Applause. Slow, gentle applause coming from the doorway behind her. She spun around on the bench, her heart pounding. Standing in the doorway was an old man in a janitor's uniform, holding a mop and bucket. He had gray hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, and he was smiling at her with a warmth she had not seen since she left home. "Sorry," he said, his voice low and kind. "Did not mean to scare you. I was just cleaning the hallway and heard you playing. Could not help but stop and listen." Elena did not know what to say. She was embarrassed that someone had heard her, even if it was just a janitor. "I was just practicing," she mumbled. "I will get out of your way." "No, no," the old man said, holding up his hand. "Please, do not stop on my account. That was beautiful." Elena blinked. Beautiful. Nobody at Whitmore had ever called her playing beautiful. "Thank you," she whispered. The old man leaned against the doorframe and looked at her with curious eyes. "You play with a lot of feeling," he said, "a lot of heart. Most of the students here, they play like machines, perfect but empty. You play like someone who has lived." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She quickly looked down at the piano keys so he would not see. "I do not think I am very good," she said quietly. "Everyone here thinks I do not belong." The old man was silent for a moment. Then he walked into the room and sat down on a folding chair near the wall. "You know," he said, "I used to play piano myself, long time ago. Jazz, mostly. Played in clubs all over this city back when I was young and stupid and thought I would live forever." Elena looked up, surprised. "You were a musician?" He nodded, holding up his hands. She noticed for the first time that his fingers were bent and twisted, swollen at the joints. "Arthritis," he explained. "Started when I was about 50. By 60, I could not play anymore. Hurt too much. So now I push a mop instead of playing keys." He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Life is funny that way." "I am sorry," Elena said, and she meant it. The old man shrugged. "Do not be sorry. I had my time, played with some of the greats, made music that mattered, at least to me. Cannot ask for more than that." He paused and looked at her carefully. "What is your name, young lady?" "Elena." "Elena," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I am Raymond. Nice to meet you." They talked for almost an hour that night. Elena told him everything. About the trailer park, about teaching herself on the broken keyboard, about winning the scholarship and thinking her dreams had finally come true. And then about Harrington, about the showcase, about the humiliation that had shattered her confidence into a million pieces. Raymond listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "That man Harrington," he said slowly, "he is not wrong about everything. You do play like someone who learned from a screen. But that is not an insult, Elena. That is just a fact. You taught yourself, which means you missed some things along the way. Things that could make you even better than you already are." Elena felt her heart sink. So he was right. "I do not belong here." "No," Raymond said firmly. "That is not what I said. I said you missed some things. But missing something does not mean you cannot learn it. It just means nobody taught you yet." He leaned forward in his chair. "I cannot play anymore. These hands will not let me. But I still remember everything. I still know what it takes to make music that moves people. And I see something in you, Elena. Something real. Something most of these fancy students will never have, no matter how many lessons they take." Elena stared at him. "What do you see?" "Hunger," Raymond said. "You want it. Not for the fame or the money or the applause. You want it because the music is part of you, because you cannot imagine living without it. That kind of hunger you cannot teach. You either have it or you do not." He stood up slowly, his old bones creaking. "I am here every night, cleaning these rooms. If you want, I can teach you what I know. Not the formal stuff they teach upstairs. The real stuff. The stuff that makes the difference between a good musician and a great one." Elena could not believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? For me?" Raymond smiled. "I told you. I cannot play anymore. But maybe I can help someone else play. Maybe that is why I am still here." He picked up his mop and bucket and headed for the door. "Think about it. I will be around." He left, and Elena sat alone in the basement practice room for a long time. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The next night, she came back to the basement at midnight. Raymond was there waiting for her. And so began the most important education of her life. He taught her things no textbook could explain. How to breathe with the music, how to feel the silence between the notes, how to tell a story without words. He could not demonstrate anymore, but he would sit beside her and guide her with his voice, pointing out moments where she was holding back, pushing her to dig deeper into her own emotions. "Music is not about being perfect," he told her one night. "It is about being honest. When you play, you are telling people who you are. So stop trying to be what they want. Be who you are. Let them hear your truth." Slowly, something began to change inside Elena. The shame and fear that had weighed her down started to lift. She was still an outsider at Whitmore. She still ate alone and walked through the halls like a ghost. But now she had a secret. She had a teacher who believed in her. And late at night, in a forgotten basement, she was becoming the musician she was always meant to be. She did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. An opportunity was coming, one that would give her a chance to prove to everyone, including herself, that she belonged on that stage, and this time, she would be ready. 3 months had passed since Elena first met Raymond in the basement. 3 months of secret lessons, late-night practice sessions, and slow but steady transformation. She was still invisible at Whitmore during the day, still the girl nobody talked to, still the charity case that Harrington had dismissed. But at night, in that forgotten basement, she was becoming someone new. Raymond pushed her harder than any teacher ever had. He made her play the same passage 50 times, until she understood not just the notes, but the emotion behind them. He made her close her eyes and describe what the music looked like in her mind. He made her talk about her childhood, her mother, her fears and dreams, and then told her to put all of it into her playing. "The piano is not an instrument," he told her one night. "It is a mirror. When you play, people see who you really are. So stop hiding. Let them see you." It was the hardest thing Elena had ever done. She had spent her whole life hiding her poverty, her loneliness, her desperate hunger for something more. But Raymond would not let her hide anymore. He stripped away every wall she had built and forced her to play with her whole heart exposed. And slowly, her music began to change. She could hear it herself. The same pieces she had played at the showcase now sounded completely different. There was depth where there had been emptiness. There was truth where there had been imitation. She was not just playing the notes anymore. She was living them. But outside the basement, nothing had changed. She still walked through the halls alone. She still sat in Harrington's class while he pretended she did not exist. She still heard the whispers and felt the stares. The other students had written her off months ago. To them, she was already gone. Just a ghost waiting to disappear. Then, one afternoon in early spring, everything changed. Elena was walking past the main bulletin board when she saw a crowd of students gathered around a new poster. She almost kept walking. She had learned to avoid crowds at Whitmore, but something made her stop and look. The poster announced the Whitmore International Piano Competition. It was the biggest event of the year, a prestigious contest that attracted attention from music critics, talent agents, and orchestra directors from around the world. Past winners had gone on to perform at Carnegie Hall, sign recording contracts, and launch international careers. It was the kind of opportunity that could change a life overnight. Elena read the poster with a hollow feeling in her chest. The competition was only for selected students, hand-picked by the faculty based on skill and potential. There was no way she would ever be chosen. Harrington would make sure of that. She turned to walk away, but then she heard something that made her freeze. A group of students was standing nearby, laughing about something. One of them, a tall boy with slicked-back hair who had mocked her since the first week, was speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Can you imagine if someone entered the scholarship, girl?" he said with a cruel grin. "She would get up there and embarrass herself all over again. Harrington would probably have a heart attack." His friends laughed. One of the girls pulled out her phone. "I dare you to do it," she said. "Submit her name. It would be hilarious." The boy shrugged. "Why not? It is not like she would actually get picked, but if she did—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Everyone knew what he meant. Elena walked away quickly, her face burning. She told herself it did not matter. It was just a stupid joke. There was no way the committee would actually select her. She was nobody. But 2 weeks later, she received an email that made her heart stop. One of the original finalists had withdrawn due to a hand injury. The committee needed a replacement. And somehow, impossibly, Elena's name had been submitted and accepted. She was in the competition. Elena sat in her room staring at the email for almost an hour. Her first instinct was to decline. This was clearly a mistake, or worse, a setup. Someone had entered her name as a joke, and now she was supposed to walk into the biggest competition of the year and humiliate herself in front of the entire music world. But then she thought about Raymond. She thought about all those nights in the basement, all those hours of work, All those moments when he had pushed her to be better than she ever thought she could be. She thought about her mother, still working double shifts back in Memphis, still believing that her daughter was going to make something of herself. And she thought about Harrington, sitting in that front row with his arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. Something inside her shifted, a spark of defiance that had been buried under months of shame and self-doubt. No, she thought, I am not going to run away. Not this time. She accepted the invitation. The news spread through Whitmore like wildfire. Everyone knew the scholarship girl had somehow gotten into the competition. The jokes and whispers doubled overnight. People laughed openly when she walked past. Even some of the faculty looked at her with pity, like they were watching someone walk toward a cliff. The worst moment came 2 days later, when Harrington stopped her in the hallway. It was the first time he had spoken to her since the showcase. I heard you accepted the competition invitation, he said, his voice cold and flat. Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. Yes, sir. Harrington studied her for a long moment. You are not ready, he said. You do not have the training, the technique, or the maturity to compete at this level. If you go through with this, you will embarrass yourself far worse than you did at the showcase. You will embarrass this institution, and you will destroy whatever small chance you might have had at a career in music. Elena felt her hands trembling at her sides. Every word he said echoed the fears in her own heart, but she did not look away. With respect, Maestro, she said quietly, I did not come this far to quit now. Harrington's expression did not change. He simply looked at her for another moment, then turned and walked away without another word. That night, Elena told Raymond what had happened. She expected him to be worried, maybe even to tell her she was making a mistake. Instead, he smiled. Good, he said. It is about time. But what if Harrington is right? Elena asked. What if I am not ready? What if I get up there and fall apart? Raymond leaned forward in his chair. Let me tell you something about being ready, he said. Nobody is ever ready, not really. The great performers, the ones who change the world, they do not wait until they are ready. They step onto that stage while their knees are still shaking and their heart is still pounding, and they play anyway. That is what separates the good from the great. Not talent, not training, courage. He reached out and put his twisted, arthritic hand on top of hers. You have something special, Elena. I have known it since the first night I heard you play. Now it is time for everyone else to know it too. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Raymond helped her choose her piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most difficult works in the entire piano repertoire, a massive piece that required incredible technical skill and emotional depth. Most pianists spent years preparing to perform it. Elena had 2 weeks. She practiced until her fingers bled. She practiced until she could play the piece in her sleep. She practiced until every note was burned into her muscles, and her memory, and her soul. Raymond sat with her every night, guiding her through the difficult passages, pushing her to dig deeper, reminding her why she was doing this. This is not about proving them wrong, he told her. This is about proving yourself right. You know who you are, now show them. The night before the competition, Elena sat alone in the basement practice room. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking. Every doubt she had ever felt was screaming in her head, telling her she was going to fail, telling her she should have stayed in Memphis where she belonged. But underneath the fear, there was something else, something stronger. Hope. She thought about her mother. She thought about Raymond. She thought about the little girl who had taught herself piano on a broken keyboard in a trailer park, dreaming of a life she could barely imagine. That girl had never given up, and neither would she. Tomorrow she would walk onto that stage. Tomorrow she would show them who she really was. Tomorrow everything would change. The night of the competition arrived faster than Elena expected. One moment she was practicing in the basement with Raymond, and the next she was standing backstage at the Whitmore Grand Auditorium, listening to the crowd settle into their seats on the other side of the curtain. She had never seen so many people in one place. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled with music critics, talent agents, orchestra directors, journalists, and hundreds of students and faculty members. Cameras lined the back wall, streaming the event live to audiences around the world. Elena peeked through a gap in the curtain and felt her stomach drop. This was not like the welcome showcase. This was something else entirely. This was the biggest stage she had ever stood on, and everyone was watching. She was the last performer of the night. 7 other pianists had already played, each one more impressive than the last. They had performed with confidence and precision, their years of training evident in every note. The audience had applauded politely after each performance, but Elena could tell they were waiting for something more, something that would make them feel. Now it was her turn. A stagehand approached her with a clipboard. 5 minutes, he said. You are up next. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was dry. Her hands were shaking. Every doubt she had ever felt was screaming in her head, louder than ever before. You do not belong here. You are going to fail. Everyone is going to laugh at you again. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She thought about Raymond, who was somewhere in the audience, watching from a seat in the back. He had told her something before she left the basement that afternoon. Do not play for them, he had said. Do not play for the judges or the critics or the people who doubted you. Play for yourself. Play for the little girl who taught herself piano on a broken keyboard. She is the one who deserves to hear this. Elena held on to those words like a lifeline. The stagehand returned. You are on. She walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The audience was a sea of shadows beyond the glare. Elena could not see individual faces, but she could feel them. Hundreds of eyes, all focused on her, all waiting to see what the scholarship girl would do. She walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen, polished black wood gleaming under the lights. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, everything was silent. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Elena began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the auditorium like a wave. The piece began slowly, building from darkness toward light, each chord heavy with emotion. Elena let the music carry her, just like Raymond had taught her. She did not think about technique or precision. She thought about truth. She thought about her mother, working double shifts in a diner, never complaining, never giving up. She let that love flow through her fingers and into the keys. She thought about her childhood, the loneliness and the longing, the feeling of being invisible in a world that did not care about people like her. She let that pain become music. She thought about Raymond, the old janitor who had seen something in her that no one else could see. She let his faith lift her higher. And she thought about herself. The girl who had dared to dream. The girl who had been knocked down and laughed at and told she would never be good enough. The girl who had refused to quit. She played for that girl. She played with everything she had. The music grew more intense, the passages faster and more demanding. Elena's fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that surprised even her. But it was not the technical skill that mattered. It was the emotion. Every note was filled with feeling, every phrase told a story. She was not just performing, she was revealing her soul. Somewhere in the middle of the piece, something shifted in the audience. Elena could feel it even without seeing it. The polite attention became something deeper. People leaned forward in their seats. Breathing slowed. The distance between performer and audience disappeared. and for a few precious minutes, they were all connected by something larger than themselves. The final movement was the hardest. It required everything Elena had left, physically and emotionally. Her arms ached, her fingers burned. But she did not hold back. She pushed through the exhaustion and played with every ounce of strength in her body. The last notes rang out through the auditorium, powerful and triumphant. Then silence. Elena sat at the piano, breathing hard, her hands trembling on the keys. She was afraid to look up. She was afraid of what she might see. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a few people clapping in the front rows. Then it spread, growing louder and louder, until it became a roar. People rose to their feet. The entire auditorium was standing, applauding, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Elena looked up and saw something she never expected. The same students who had mocked her, the same faculty who had pitied her, the same critics who had come expecting to see her fail. They were all on their feet. They were all applauding for her. She stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs and took a bow. The applause continued, washing over her like a wave. She felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not try to hide them. For the first time in her life, she was not ashamed of who she was. As she walked off stage, she glanced toward the front row. Harrington was there, standing with the rest of the audience. He was not clapping. His arms were at his sides, his expression unreadable. But as Elena's eyes met his, something happened. He nodded. It was small, barely noticeable. Just a slight dip of his head. But Elena understood what it meant. It was not an apology. Harrington would never apologize, but it was an acknowledgement. A recognition that she had proven him wrong. That tiny nod meant more to her than all the applause in the world. The judges deliberated for almost an hour. Elena waited backstage with the other competitors, too exhausted to feel nervous anymore. She had given everything she had. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. When they finally announced the results, Elena almost did not hear her name. It took several seconds for the words to reach her brain. First place. She had won. The other competitors stared at her in shock. A few of them even smiled and offered congratulations. Elena walked back onto the stage in a daze and accepted the trophy from the head judge. Cameras flashed. People cheered. It all felt like a dream. Backstage, a swarm of reporters surrounded her. They asked about her background, her training, her plans for the future. Elena answered as best she could, but her mind was elsewhere. Then she saw them. Her mother was standing at the edge of the crowd, wearing her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. She had taken time off work and flown to New York to watch her daughter perform. Beside her stood Raymond, leaning on a cane, his weathered face glowing with pride. Elena pushed through the reporters and ran to them. She threw her arms around her mother first, holding her tight, feeling the familiar warmth she had missed so much. "I am so proud of you," her mother whispered. "So proud." Then Elena turned to Raymond. The old man looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You did it," he said simply. "You showed them who you are." Elena hugged him too, this stranger who had become like family, this forgotten janitor who had given her the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. "I could not have done it without you," she said. Raymond shook his head. "No, it was always inside you. I just helped you find it." 3 months later, Elena performed at Carnegie Hall to a sold-out audience. Her name appeared in newspapers and magazines around the world. Record labels called. Orchestras invited her to tour. The girl from the trailer park had become one of the most talked-about young pianists of her generation. But on the night of her Carnegie Hall debut, before she walked onto that famous stage, Elena took a moment to remember where she had come from. She thought about the broken keyboard with the missing keys. She thought about the Greyhound bus heading north. She thought about the basement practice room where an old janitor had taught her how to play with her soul. She thought about everyone who had told her she was not good enough. And she smiled. Because she had proven them all wrong. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the only thing that had ever truly mattered: the music.